New Brunswick Queer Histories Matter is a SSHRC and NBIF-funded project that seeks to work with two LGBTQ+ youth and pre-service teachers to disrupt the erasure of queer, trans, and non-binary people and communities' histories and experiences from New Brunswick social studies classrooms. The term two LGBTQ+ refers to people who are two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and/or queer. And the plus refers to people whose gender identities and sexualities are not included in the identities of two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and/or queer. A couple of years ago in 2018, I did a project with Amelia Thorpe, who's a PhD candidate at UNB. And she took a look at every single curriculum from kindergarten to grade 12 to find out, what kind of representation was around for queer folks, especially in the social studies and history curriculum. And she found really not at all anything.
Honestly, don't think that I ever learned about queer people in school at all. If I ever was taught about it, it was done in passing and not as like an intentional thing. And I don't remember. I feel like maybe possibly during the Holocaust, it was mentioned as like, and these people, and that was it.
There was no real talk about other sexualities or genders or orientation in sex ed. I took a Canadian history course and no mention of anything queer there.
There were a couple of links that you could find that noted something about homosexuality in a couple of spaces, but really it was a complete erasure. And by engaging young people and pre-service teachers in media production, including stencil making, zine production, and self-filming, or cell phone and filmmaking, we want to tell some of the experiences and stories that have been left out of social studies classrooms and curricula. So I started teaching or planning to teach the social studies class, and I was looking at things like, New Brunswick African Canadian histories and New Brunswick queer histories, and I came across the work of Dusty Green, who had started the New Brunswick Queer Heritage Initiative.
I was doing an internship at the Provincial Archives of New Brunswick, and I was basically scanning and digitizing and editing photos. And at some point there, we came across an album of some POW, some prisoner of war. It was a photo album from Amherst, Nova Scotia, that included many photos of the Amherst internment camp and the POWs who lived there, or who were in prison there. And a lot of them were wearing wigs in the photos and in drag. And that really confused me, just because it sort of challenged my perception or my understanding of history and POW camps and sort of gender expression in the past and what that was like. I knew that there was this long history of drag and theater intersecting, but to me it really it opened my eyes that like gender expression and gender roles from the past are not necessarily what I thought they were. So I started asking around the archives if there was any other sort of queer content, and I got a kind of a no. there's not.
All of the information that you find is on a Canada level or on a global level, what other countries are doing, and you just don't find out about what happens in New Brunswick. And so we kind of just don't deal with how people experience things in New Brunswick.
When I saw that there wasn't an institution actively collecting queer records in New Brunswick like there are in many other places, I was just like, why is this happening? And why isn't it happening?
Something that's really important to recognize is that one of the challenges in doing this work in the participants that I have been working with, but also in the Queer Heritage collection itself, is that it collects a lot of the histories of queer white New Brunswickers. And of course, like if we look to the folks who were here first, the Wolastoqey people, the Mi'kmaq people in this territory, the Passamaquoddy, it's really important to remember that gender diversity and sexual diversity were already practiced here from time immemorial, and what disrupted the recognition of two-spirit people was colonization, was the interruption of white folks into this space.
I think that we have to get to a point where anything other than accepting and actively doing something about it is unacceptable. The idea that there are people in schools who quietly don't tolerate it or care about it but don't do anything in their classrooms it shouldn't happen.
It's all levels of education, I think. You can start talking about queer subjects really, really early, but if you don't have teachers that are out and you don't have support systems in place helping kids or informing kids, and it's also not in the curriculum, then it puts New Brunswick queer kids and educators in a really tricky spot where they don't really feel seen in their school system, and that's not good. It's dangerous, I think.
Kids are really receptive or really interested in it. If you can create a safe space where they can ask questions. I do health class with my grade 7s, and the minute you start talking about gender and sexuality, like, sure, they don't necessarily have all of the right information or the right words to use, but if you're willing to answer their questions, they would love to learn about it. And even kids that are maybe not super on board with it, I feel like a lot of it is because they don't know.
You can start with these accepting attitudes at a really young age, and I think that can be really, really transformative for an individual and an institution, and with enough time and effort, it can be a transformation for a society, which is, I know that sounds like really grand and big, but I honestly, truly believe that education is where we'll make some real inroads with queer acceptance and a lack of queer erasure, so queer visibility, I guess.
Throughout the New Brunswick Queer Histories Matter project, we seek to queer the teaching of social studies by questioning the existing curricula and working against heteronormativity, transphobia, white supremacy, and settler colonialism. We also want to work with teachers and students to continue to make media, to build on our resources, and to create a New Brunswick social studies classroom that is justice-oriented and promotes complexity rather than erasing differences to further entrench homophobia, transphobia, settler colonialism, nationalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. The idea was really to build on what Dusty has done, his important work, and the work of the entire Queer Heritage Initiative of New Brunswick, which is really just to interrupt the erasure of queer folks from New Brunswick and identify that, of course, queer folks have always been here, and make a little bit of change.